अस्सलाम वालेकुम एवरीवन, क्या हाल चाल है। वालेकुम अस्सलाम। I'm good, alhamdulillah. How are you guys? Okay, I don't know what that means. Sir, please increase the volume of your mic. एक तो हर स्ट्रीम में कोई ना कोई एक ऐसा होता है जिसको वॉल्यूम से प्रॉब्लम होती है। What about the rest of you? वॉल्यूम सही लग रहा है आप लोगों को? मैंने बढ़ा दिया, बट अभी भी अगर मसला है तो बता दें। चलो मैंने बढ़ा दिया है, अगर दोबारा प्रॉब्लम हो तो ज़्यादा हो गया तो बेटा कम कर लो, इसमें क्या मसला है। केमिस्ट्री में हेल्प चाहिए, बट आई एम probably the worst person to ask for help in chemistry. Anyway, so I think let's start in a couple of minutes. Sir, you are assuming that May June 2025 ad math paper is going to be difficult. No, I'm not assuming anything. मैं सिर्फ आप लोगों को ये कहूँगा कि prepare for the worst, so that अगर आसान पेपर आ गया तो very good, अगर difficult पेपर आया तो you're prepared for it. ठीक है? So this is not something, I mean, I always say one thing, that you and I can sit here and debate for hours and hours about what's going to be in the paper, whether it's going to be difficult, what the threshold is going to be like, but there is no outcome of this debate. Okay, there is no outcome of this debate. There is no, it's all going to be a speculation. Okay, it's my prediction, maybe against yours, maybe against someone else's. So if I tell you that, don't worry about it, paper is going to be a piece of cake, nothing to worry about, so you guys will probably end up slacking. So that's why I always tell my students to count on your own preparation, not on the threshold, not on the difficulty level of the paper. However, when you're solving papers on your own, then it's a good idea to look at the threshold and see what grade you're getting after the threshold is applied, so that you know exactly where you stand. ठीक है, अपनी ये झूठी तसल्लियाँ ना दिया करें अपने आप को कि आसान होगा फैब्रिक, क्योंकि पहली दफ़ा जो है वो सिलेबस चेंज होके वो इम्तिहान ले रहे हैं तो आसान होगा, ऐसा कोई नहीं है। पहली दफ़ा हो गया, ठीक है, फेब मार्च में वो ऑलरेडी हो गया, ठीक है, एटलीस्ट IGCSE में तो हो गया। हाँ, O levels में इट्स गोना बी द फर्स्ट टाइम आफ्टर द सिलेबस चेंज, बट कम टू थिंक ऑफ इट, एज फार एज O level is concerned, it's not a major change for O level students, it's a major change for IGCSE students, because उनका पूरा एक पेपर नॉन कैलकुलेटर हो गया, तो it's a major change for them, not for you guys. How long is this stream for? So this is going to be a short stream because this topic in it of itself is not that complicated. It's a very simple topic. I don't know why you guys have been making a big deal of it. My DMs, my WhatsApp is just full of asymptotes. So I thought finally let's do a stream and get it out of the way. So I have compiled some past paper questions as well. So we're going to do that. And yeah, so let's get to work. So basically, in the last stream, if you haven't seen the last stream, I would suggest you watch that stream. Not right now, you can watch it later. Achha, also before I start, I would really appreciate if you guys like the stream and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. Achha, just a second. मैं ज़रा एक message डाल दूँ. Just a minute. Okay, so in the last stream, we did linear, we did quadratic, and we did cubic. Now, linear and quadratic have always been part of the syllabus, but I think they've doubled down on it. now you can expect like a proper question on quadratic, and cubic is something that has been added recently in the syllabus, and it's the same for both. Okay, so this applies to O level as well as IGCSE. So IGCSE students ये ना समझें कि oh this is only for O level students ये ना समझें कि this is only for IGCSE. It applies to both. And exponential and rational, they too have also been part of the syllabus, but now they come with asymptotes. Asymptote is something that has been added in the syllabus as well. Acha. So let's start with rational. Let's start with... Nahi Mariam, there is nobody to remind me. Okay, I just kind of remember to say it myself. And अभी lately इतनी streams की हैं कि आदत हो गई है. So rational graphs भी बोलते हैं इसको, ठीक है, और इसको reciprocal graphs भी बोलते हैं. Okay, so we call them rational or we call them reciprocal graphs. So what they look like is very simple. So you have y is equals to 1 upon x. Okay, you don't necessarily have to plug in values and find out what the graph looks like. What you can do is you can just memorize the shape. But if you ever forget, you can plug in a few values and find out what it looks like. ठीक है, अब इसको एक simple example से समझ लेते हैं. ठीक है, let's say कि एक pizza है और उसको x लोगों में divide करना है. Now, the more the number of people that you have, the less will be the amount of pizza that you're gonna get. ठीक है, so think of y as, ठीक है, so y को आप समझें as pizza, and think of x as the number of people. ठीक है, so if you increase the number of people, what happens? The pizza that every person gets will go down. Okay, if you increase the number of people, the pizza that every person gets will go down. If, however, you decrease the number of people, then what happens? The amount of pizza that everyone gets will go up. ठीक है, कॉमन सेंस की बात है, जितने ज़्यादा लोग होंगे उतना कम पिज़्ज़ा मिलेगा, जितने कम लोग होंगे उतना आपको पिज़्ज़ा ज़्यादा मिलेगा. ठीक है, पिज़्ज़ा फिक्स्ड है, देयर इज जस्ट वन पिज़्ज़ा. सो इसका जो ग्राफ बनता है ना, इट्स बेसिकली समथिंग लाइक दिस. This is what the graph looks like. Okay, now why does the graph look like this? Let's understand this also. और इस ग्राफ पे एक पॉइंट होता है 1,1. ठीक है, एक पॉइंट 1,1 इसलिए होता है that if you plug in x as 1, you get y as 1. So what happens is, as the number of people keep increasing, the pizza per person keeps decreasing. ठीक है, और जैसे जैसे आप लोग कम करते रहेंगे तो क्या होगा? The amount of pizza that each person gets will increase. ठीक है, इसको मैं यहाँ से थोड़ा शिफ्ट करके इधर ले जाते हैं. So as x decreases, the number of people, the pizza that every person gets will increase, and as x increases, the pizza that every person gets will obviously go down. ठीक है, so this is what the graph looks like. अच्छा, but this is on the positive side. Okay, this is what the graph looks like on the positive side. If you plug in positive values of x, you get positive values of y also. Now, what happens if you plug in negative values of x? So, common sense, if you plug in negative values of x, you will get negative y values. So, that means this graph has another shape. Okay, there is another part of this graph on this side, and this is what it looks like. Okay, now, इसका जो normally question आता है ना, इसका normally question इस तरह का आता है that you're supposed to look at the graph and you're supposed to be able to identify कि ये किसका graph है. That's the kind of question that you normally get. ठीक है, अभी हम कुछ questions solve करेंगे. So you will see that the kind of questions that we get are actually not that difficult. You're just supposed to memorize the shapes, and you are supposed to be able to point out that what this graph belongs to. Now, so this was one example. Now let's do another example. Let's say you have y is equals to minus 1 upon x. ठीक है, अब जब भी हम पूरे y को माइनस से मल्टीप्लाई करते हैं, what happens? The graph gets reflected. ठीक है, like for example over here, let's draw the graph of y is equals to 1 upon x, and then let's draw the graph of y is equal to minus 1 upon x. ठीक है, इसको थोड़ी देर के लिए हाइड कर देते हैं. So if you look at the graph of y is equals to 1 upon x, it's very similar to the graph that I have drawn. But if you look at the graph of y is equals to minus 1 upon x, and if you compare the two, तो ये क्या हुआ है? ये एक तरह से reflect हो गया. ठीक है? So once again, all you're supposed to do is you're just supposed to memorize what it looks like. So the graph of y is equals to -1 upon x इस तरह का लगेगा. और इसमें बेहतर ये है कि आप याद ही कर लें. You know that I'm not always in favor of memorizing, but in this case, I think considering the number of marks that we get, you'll be wasting a lot of time if you put in effort to understand how it works. Instead, the best thing you can do is you can just memorize it. Achha. So here, however, if you plug in x as 1, okay, so imagine that if I plug in x as 1, y will be equal to -1. So that means the graph will pass from here. Okay, and then another shape of the graph will be here. That is, if you plug in -1 in place of x, y turns out to be +1. ठीक है, ये कुछ पॉइंट्स हैं, ये आप याद रखें, जहन में रखें कि अगर x हमने प्लग इन किया -1, then y will turn out to be 1. If, however, we plug in 1 in place of x, if, however, I plug in 1 in place of x, ठीक है, so this is just a rough sketch. If I plug in 1 in place of x, तो y क्या आएगा? -1 आएगा. ठीक है? अच्छा. Now, if you plug in -2, so y will be equal to +1 upon 2. ठीक है? So basically, observe this, that as you plug in negative x values, what result you get? You get positive y values. Okay, so negative x values give you positive y values. If, however, you plug in positive x values, you get negative y values. Okay? Yes, it will not touch the x-axis ever. Why? Because think about it this way. Is there a value that you can plug in so that y can be equal to 0? Is this ever equal to 0? No, it's not. ठीक है? अच्छा, also, इस तरह के अगर आपने कभी expression देखा हो तो उसके साथ लिखा होता है x is not equal to 0. ठीक है, क्या लिखा होता है? x is not equal to 0. ठीक है? अब वो क्यों लिखा होता है? वो इसलिए लिखा होता है because you cannot plug in x equals to 0 in this curve. What happens if you plug in x equals to 0? The whole function becomes what? The whole function becomes undefined. So that's the reason why you cannot plug in x equals to 0. ठीक है, अच्छा, अब एक काम करते हैं, इसका ना ज़रा standard rule बना लेते हैं कुछ. So now let's make some general rules for ourselves. And then we'll look into asymptotes as well. Achha, what's the general rule? The general rule is that if you have y is equals to a upon x, and given that a is greater than 0, तो फिर आपका ग्राफ कैसा होगा? फिर आपका ग्राफ ऐसा होगा. If you have y is equals to a upon x, and given that a is greater than 0, doesn't matter whether it's 1, 2, whatever, then the graph will look like this. You'll have one side here and one part over here. Okay, here's x, here's y. ठीक है, अभी asymptotes पे भी आते हैं, टेंशन ना लें. On the other hand, if you have, let's say, y is equals to a upon x, where the numerator is negative. Okay, so given that a is less than 0. So in that case, what will the graph look like? Let's have a look. So in that case, this is what the graph is going to look like. If a is less than 0, that means एक half इस quadrant में होगा और एक half इस quadrant में होगा. Here's x, here is y. Yes, the line gets closer and closer to the axis, but it's never equal to it. ठीक है, उसके बारे में भी अभी बात करते हैं. पहले ज़रा कुछ general rules बना लेते हैं. ठीक है, then we'll talk about asymptotes as well. अच्छा, then there is a third possibility also. ठीक है, एक third possibility भी देख लें आप लोग. उसको मैं यहीं पे करा देता हूँ. Before I give you guys the general rule, third possibility भी मैं आपको इधर ही करा देता हूँ. Just a second. इसको हम ले जाते हैं यहाँ पे. I'll share these notes with you guys. Don't worry about it. Last class के notes भी मैंने upload कर दिए हैं. You can get it from the link in description. So another possibility is that what if, let's say you have, because this is also something that has been tested, what if you have, let's say y is equals to 1 upon x square. Now what happens when you square something? कोई भी नंबर स्क्वायर करें अगर, तो what can you tell me about the end result? If I square something, what can you tell me about the end result? Sir, for the next S1 stream, can you do permutation? Yes, permutation combination का basically एक part रह गया है जो मैं concept की playlist बना रहा हूँ. वो एक part इंशाल्लाह आजकल में आ जाएगा. And then after that, I'll be doing lots and lots of past paper streams of permutation combination inshallah. So here's x, here's y. Now if you square something, then what happens is that no matter if x is positive or negative, y will always be positive. So if you plug in a positive value of x, y will be positive. But if you plug in a negative value of x, then also what happens? Y will also be positive. Okay? No, I wouldn't suggest कि एड मैथ स्टूडेंट्स जो हैं वो S1 वाला कंटेंट देखें क्योंकि फिर वो काफ़ी डिप्रेशन में चले जाएंगे. ठीक है, आपके डिप्रेशन में जाने का टाइम आएगा जब आप ए लेवल में मैथ लेंगे और अगर आपने S1 लिया. खैर S1 तो लेना ही पड़ेगा इरिस्पेक्टिव. सो अभी आप एड मैथ्स के परम्यूटेशन कॉम्बिनेशन एंजॉय करें. अभी S1 की परम्यूटेशन कॉम्बिनेशन ना ही देखें, या अगर देखना है तो अपनी रिस्क पे देखिएगा. सो लेट्स से यू हैव y is equals to -1 upon x square. Okay, so let's say the graph that we're supposed to draw is y is equals to -1 upon x square. Now what happens if you draw the graph of y is equals to -1 upon x square? The end result is always going to be what? The end result is always going to be negative. Why? Because x square to positive aayega hamesha, but as soon as there is a minus sign, what happens? The end result is always going to be negative. So that means this is what the graph now looks like. Okay, this is what the graph now looks like. Okay, so let's add this to the general rule also. So here is another general rule. Let's say you have y is equals to a upon x square. Acha, add maths ki differentiation I'm streaming right after today's class. So any add math student watching, I'm streaming differentiation right after today's math stream. And I'm continuing differentiation. We'll be doing differentiation of exponential, trigonometric, and what else? Logarithmic, inshallah. So a upon x square, if a is positive, this is what the graph is going to look like. However, if it's a upon x square and given that a is negative, in that case, what will the graph look like? Let's have a look at that also. Y is equals to a upon x square, and given that a is less than 0, so in that case the graph will look like this. Here's x, here's y, so it's going to be below the x-axis. Okay, now अच्छा, अब एक काम करते हैं. Let's do some past paper questions. I know there's asymptotes that we have to cover, but first let's do some past paper questions and then we'll get to asymptotes as well. Okay? Just 1 or 2 past paper questions and then we'll do asymptotes, so nothing to worry about. So basically, have a look at this question. This question says, which of the graphs shown above could be the graph of y is equals to x cubed, y equals to 1 upon x squared, y is equals to x minus 1. Now here's my suggestion. Start with the easiest. This is a cubic graph. Okay, so we'll look for a cubic graph. This is a rational, or you can say a reciprocal graph. We'll look for it later. And this is a linear graph. So let's start with linear. ठीक है, अब इसमें से कौन सा ग्राफ linear है? We can see that it's figure 2 or it's figure 5. Okay. Now, y equals to x minus 1. What kind of a graph is this going to be? This is going to be a graph where it's a straight line and it's an upward sloping line and the y-intercept is -1. Now, how many graphs do you see that have that are basically a straight line? We see these two. Of these two, how many are upward sloping? There's just one line which is upward sloping, and you can see that the y-intercept is going to be a negative value. So that means the answer to part C is figure 2. Okay. Now cubic, cubic graph याद रखो, जो general आपका cubic graph होता है वो basically ऐसा होता है. ठीक है, मैं इसको यहाँ पे भी चलो standard rules में ना मैं यहाँ पे cubic भी add कर देता हूँ. So let's say if you have y is equals to ax cube, where a is greater than 0, then this is what the graph looks like. If you have y is equals to ax cube, where a is greater than 0, then the general shape of the graph looks like this. Oops, sorry. ठीक है? So here's the x-axis, here's the y-axis. Now, is there a cubic graph? Yes, there is. And that is basically figure 6. There is no other cubic graph, so that means the answer to part A is figure 6. ठीक है? अच्छा, यहाँ पे साथ साथ ये भी ऐड कर लो कि what happens if A is less than 0. Let's add that also. So what happens if y is equals to ax cube and A is less than 0? So in that case, your graph will look slightly different, and the graph's going to look like this. If you plug in a negative x value, you get a negative y value. If you plug in a positive x value, you get a negative y value. Okay? So here's what you get. Just a minute. Okay, now. One second, let me just make sure that this is correct. If A is minus 2x cube, then it's going to be second to fourth. Yeah, so yeah. Okay, so now let's have a look at rational. So we have 1 upon x squared. Now how many rational graphs do we have? Here's one, and here's another one. Okay, so there's figure 1 and figure 4. Now if you think about it, यहाँ पे y is negative, but we saw earlier that no matter what the value of x is, if there is a square, y should always be positive. Okay, y should always be positive, and that means there's only one figure which could be the graph of y is equals to 1 upon x squared, and that's basically figure 4. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, ADMATS, देखो ADMATS के cubic graphs are different. Okay, now ये मैं बात कर रहा हूँ बिल्कुल basic cubic graph के, जिसमें there is no x square, there is no x, there is no constant. ठीक है, I'm talking about very basic basic cubic graphs. Okay, अच्छा, अब एक काम करते हैं. Let's talk about. So we've seen some general rules. Now what I'd like to do is I would like to talk about asymptotes. ठीक है? So finally, this is the moment of truth. Let's talk about asymptotes. अच्छा, asymptotes क्या होते हैं? ये देखें आप लोग. By definition, asymptote, अगर मैं आपको इसकी simplest definition दूँ, is basically an infinite dotted line that the graph approaches but never touches. ठीक है? So what are asymptotes? Asymptotes are basically infinite dotted lines that the graph approaches but never touches. ठीक है? अब let's have a look at asymptotes in rational graphs. ठीक है? अब rational graphs के asymptotes ज़रा समझते हैं. So let's have a look at y is equals to 1 upon x. अब नोट करें, यहाँ पे एक horizontal asymptote भी है और यहाँ पे एक vertical asymptote भी है. No, a is not any variable. A is basically a constant. Okay, a is not any variable, a is just a constant. So here, if you look at this graph closely, you will notice that there is a certain value which this graph is never ever going to be equal to. It's approaching that value, but it's never ever going to be equal to. So imagine that I draw a line at y is equals to 0. Okay, so imagine that I draw a line at y equals to 0. Now what happens? Will this graph ever approach the line y equals to 0? No, it's never going to approach the line y equals to 0, but it's going to get closer and closer to it. So if you look at the graph is in purple. If you look at y equals to 0, that line y equals to 0 is in red. So it's going to get closer and closer to it, but it's never going to touch it. Similarly, this is a horizontal asymptote. Similarly, we also have a vertical asymptote. So vertical asymptote here is technically the y-axis, which has equation x equals to 0. So here, if you look at the two graphs, if you look at the line which is in blue and if you look at the graph in purple, notice that the graph is going to get closer and closer to that line, but it's never, ever, ever going to touch it. Okay, therefore, it's an asymptote. Now, how do we find the equation of an asymptote? Very simple. So let's say you have y is equals to 1 upon x. Okay, let's say you have y is equals to 1 upon x. Okay, so first let me give you the standard rule and then we'll look into some examples as well. So let's say you have y is equals to a upon x minus b plus c. Okay, so we're going to look into some standard rules of asymptotes. So in order to find the horizontal asymptote, okay, so let's start with the horizontal asymptote. Okay, and this is only for rational graphs. In order to find out the horizontal asymptote, equate the denominator to 0. Sorry, that's for the vertical asymptote. In order to find out the vertical asymptote, equate the denominator to 0. That means the vertical asymptote in this case is going to be x equals to p. So what's the vertical asymptote going to be? That's going to be x equals to p. This is what? This is basically the equation of the vertical asymptote. अभी एग्जाम्पल करेंगे तो और समझ आ जाएगा. ठीक है, अभी we're just writing down the rules so you can refer to them whenever you want. Now similarly, if there is a horizontal asymptote, how do you find out the equation of the horizontal asymptote? For the horizontal asymptote, it's y equals to the constant. Okay, so what's the constant here? It's plus c. So that means the equation of the horizontal asymptote will be y is equals to c. ठीक है, अभी एक example करेंगे तो ये भी समझ आ जाएगा. So this is the equation of the vertical asymptote. Now, here, let's understand this further. पहले focus करते हैं. First, let's focus on vertical asymptotes. Now, imagine if I change this to x minus 1. Now, note करो कि ये graph एक point पे ना, the graph is going to infinity. Okay, so there comes a point where the graph approaches infinity. I want you to focus on the vertical asymptote only, not on the horizontal asymptote. So, look at the vertical asymptote. What will be the equation of the vertical asymptote? If I ask you to point it out, so it's basically this vertical line. Now imagine that there is a vertical line at x equals to 1. What will happen is the graph will get closer and closer to it, but it's never actually going to touch it. The graph is going to get closer and closer to it, but it's never ever actually going to touch it. Okay, now let's see what the asymptote looks like. X equals to 1. Now where is this coming from? This is coming from equating the denominator to 0. Now imagine if this was x minus 2. Okay, now what will the asymptote look like? So let's hide this line for a minute. You can see that here at x equals to 2, there can be an infinitely long dotted line drawn, which the graph will approach, but it will never ever touch it, let alone cut it. Okay, so let's draw the line x equals to 2. So you can see that this is basically the equation of the vertical asymptote. Now let's talk about the horizontal asymptote. So let's go back to y is equals to 1 upon x. Achha, what if it was, let's say, x plus 1? So here, equate the denominator to 0. And if you equate the denominator to 0, what do you get? You get x equals to minus 1. Now, x equals to minus 1 pe, you can see that if there was a line over here, if there was a vertical line at x equals to minus 1, the graph would approach it, but it would never, ever touch it. Okay, so let's draw the line x equals minus 1 just to be sure. So here you can see that the graph is getting closer and closer, but it's never actually touching it. Okay, so those are basically horizontal asymptotes. You can just refer to the standard rule and answer the question, but for those of you who want to see it in action, here it is. Now, let's say you have y is equals to 1 upon x, okay, and plus 2. अब देखो horizontal asymptote क्या है? Let's look at the horizontal asymptote. Is there a horizontal line is there a point where if I draw a horizontal line, the graph will get closer and closer to it, but it's never actually going to touch it? Question for you guys. Can you see a point on this graph where if I draw a horizontal line, the graph will get closer and closer to it, but it's never going to touch it? what is it going to be? Y equals to 2. Very good. And where is it coming from? Here. So what you have to do is, how do you find out the equation of the horizontal asymptote? Here's what you do. Just equate y to the constant. So that's y is equals to 2. And you have the equation of the horizontal asymptote. Okay, so I repeat. Just ignore the graph. Just equate y equals to 2. And you have the equation of the horizontal asymptote. Okay. Now, what if, let's say, this is plus 5? What happens then? Now, what will the horizontal asymptote look like? It will be at y equals to 5. So here it is. Y is equals to 5. There is the asymptote. If I change this to minus 5, तो asymptote कहाँ चला गया? Asymptote आ गया y equals to minus 5 पे. Here, y equals to minus 5. At this point, if you draw a horizontal line, what will the asymptote look like? It's going to be y is equals to minus 5. Okay, so y equals to the constant for the horizontal asymptote. For the vertical asymptote, equate the denominator to 0. Okay. Acha, now if you change this, if for example you change this, if you change, let's say, this from 1 to 2, no difference. If you change this to 5, still also no difference. Okay, so the numerator is irrelevant. If I change this to minus, let's say this is, instead of 1 upon x, this is minus 2 upon x, no difference. Everything, all the rules remain intact. ठीक है, उससे फर्क नहीं पड़ता. The shape of the graph changes, but every other rule remains intact. Okay, let's do a few examples to understand how things work. So let's do a few examples. Let's say you're supposed to draw the graph of y is equals to 1 over x minus 1 plus 3. Okay, now let's say you want to find out you want to write down the equation of the horizontal asymptote and the vertical asymptote. So what will the vertical asymptote look like? Or what will be the equation of the vertical asymptote? The equation of the vertical asymptote will be, take the denominator, equate it to 0. That means x minus 1 equals to 0. So that means x equals to 1. Okay. Now, if you want to find out the equation of the horizontal asymptote, for that, y is equals to the constant that you have in the end. That's the answer. Simple as that. Okay. Achha, I think my camera has turned off for some reason. Yeah, I know. Yep. Just a minute. I'll fix the camera. First, let's... just a minute. In the meantime, I would like you guys to do this. Do y is equals to minus 3 over x plus 2 minus 4. Tell me the equation of the horizontal asymptote. Tell me the equation of the vertical asymptote. Okay. So vertical would be, now make sure that you guys write down the proper equation. So the vertical asymptote would be x plus 2 equals to 0. That means x equals to minus 2. And the horizontal asymptote would simply be y is equals to minus 4. That's it. ठीक है, टेस्ट भी कर लेते हैं इसको. So what was the equation? It was minus 3 over x plus 2 minus 4. So minus 3 over x plus 2 minus 4. Okay. So The vertical asymptote, as you can see, is at -2. The horizontal asymptote, as you can see, is at -4. Simple as that. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा. Ab, there's one more concept, and that basically involves exponential graphs. So first, let's do that. उसके भी ज़रा हमें asymptotes देखने हैं, उसके भी standard rules बनाने, and then we will do some past paper questions. So now we're going to look into exponential graphs. How much weightage? Not that much, which is why I have been procrastinating it for a very long time. It doesn't have a lot of weightage, probably just 1 or 2 marks, not more than that. Okay, but since you guys had been making a big deal about it, so I thought might as well cover it. So exponential graphs. Now exponential graphs का जो standard form होती है, that's basically y is equals to 2 power x, y is equals to 3 power x, stuff like that. AdMath stream is starting, अच्छा, functions I will do in the coming week. Okay, but you will find videos of functions very soon, inshallah. Most likely starting today. But AdMath stream, I'm streaming for differentiation of trigonometric, exponential, and logarithmic right after this stream at 4 p.m. basically. So let's say you have y is equals to 2 raised to the power of x. Okay. Now we all can mentally plug in values, and we all know what the end result is going to be. So if you plug in 0, you get 1. Okay, if you plug in 1, you get 2. If you plug in 2, you get 4. If you plug in 3, you get 8, stuff like that. And if you plug in -1, y still remains positive. If you plug in -1, you get 2 raised to the power -1, which is equal to 1 upon 2. If you plug in, कुछ values plug in करके देख लेते हैं, चलें. If you plug in x equals to -2, you get y to be equal to 1 upon 4. If you plug in x equals to -1, you get y to be equal to 1 upon 2. If you plug in x equals to 0, you get y to be equal to 1. If you plug in x equals to 1, you get y to be equal to 1, and then y is going to be equal to 2, and then y is going to be equal to 4, and then y is going to be equal to 8, so on and so forth. So what does the graph look like? This is what the graph looks like. Okay, so remember, this is what an exponential graph looks like. It will get closer and closer to the x-axis, but it's never going to cut the x-axis. Okay, so this was just one example. Now what we're going to do is, we're going to multiply y with negative and see what happens. We're going to multiply x with negative, see what happens. We're going to multiply both of them with negative and then see what happens. Now suppose you have y is equals to -2 raised to the power of x. Now what will happen is, no matter the value of x that you plug in, the end result is always going to be negative. Okay, so आप x की कोई सी भी value plug in कर लें, the end result is always going to be negative. And what happens if you plug in 0? If you plug in 0, y is going to be equal to -2 raised to the power 0, which means y is going to be equal to 1. Okay, so just a minute. Let me fix this. Okay. So what will happen is, this graph will be a reflection along the x-axis. Okay, so imagine that there is this graph. Now imagine that you take this graph and you reflect it along the x-axis. So this is what happens. Okay, so that means the end result is going to be something like this. Okay, so this is x, this is y. Okay, आप लोग एक काम ये कर सकते हो. You guys can, take matters in your own hands if needed. You can just play around with a few graphs a little. So here's y is equals to 2 power x. Notice what happens. Now notice what happens if I take the graph and multiply it by minus. Y is equals to -2 raised to the power of x. Now compare the two graphs. What do they look like? They're basically a reflection of each other along the x-axis. Okay? Now what if suppose we have y is equals to 2 raised to the power minus x. Okay, what if we have y is equals to 2 raised to the power of minus x? Then let's see what happens. So if it's y equals to 2 raised to the power minus x, then what happens is कि जब भी हम x को minus से multiply करते हैं, so what happens to the graph? It gets reflected along the y-axis. So that means now the end result is going to be something like this. Okay, so here, see for yourself. If let's say we draw the graph of y is equals to 2 raised to the power minus x, this is what it looks like here. Now, lastly, if let's say we have y is equals to minus 2 raised to the power minus x, what if both the base and the power is negative? What if both the base and the power is negative? So then what happens? Who can guess? If the base and the power both are negative, then what happens? Anyone who can guess? Will the graph look like this? Will it look like this? Will it look like this? What will the graph look like? So when something will be added, yes. If you add something, then the graph, if you add something in the function, then the graph will either move up or it will move down, depending on where you're adding it. Okay. The last one, let's see. So if let's say we draw the graph of y is equals to minus 2 raised to the power minus x, this is what it looks like. Okay, the one that you see in black. Okay, so let's draw that. इसको थोड़ा ऊपर ले जाते हैं. Here. And this is minus 1. Okay. इसकी ऐसी शेप क्यों है? इसकी ऐसी शेप इसलिए है that if you plug in a positive x value, what happens? You get a negative y value. Okay. If you plug in a negative x value, you get a positive y value. That's how it works. Okay. Sorry, if you plug in a negative x value, you get a negative y value, and even if you plug in a positive x value, you get a negative y value. So overall, it's going to remain below the x-axis. It's not going to be above the x-axis. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about asymptotes. अच्छा, इसमें भी आपने नोट किया कि asymptotes होते हैं. So if you look at this graph, let's come back to Desmos. If you look at y is equals to 2 raised to the power of x. Now notice that there is an imaginary line that can be drawn, which the graph will get closer and closer to, but it's never going to touch it. Y-intercept will always be 1 or minus 1, because if you plug in 0, what happens when anything is raised to the power of 0? It's going to be 1. Okay, so if you plug in anything raised to, if you plug in 0 in the power, then the end result is either going to be 1 or minus 1, depending on the sign that you have. Okay? So notice that at the moment, the graph is getting closer and closer to the x-axis, but it's never touching it. So that means what will be the equation of the asymptote? The equation of the asymptote will be y equals to 0. Achha, notice what happens if I add something. If I draw y is equals to 2 power x plus 2, what happens as a result? What happens as a result is that the graph moves 2 units up. Okay, and now same thing has happened to the asymptote as well. The asymptote is now 2 units up. Okay, so that means the equation of the asymptote will be y is equals to 2. Y equals to 2 is the line that the graph is going to get closer and closer to, but it's never ever going to touch it. Now what if I subtract 2? What if I subtract 2 from here? So if I subtract 2 from here, what happens? Now the asymptote is at minus 2. So it doesn't matter whether the graph is multiplied by minus, whether you multiply x by minus, all that is irrelevant. So we're trying to identify a general rule here. Okay, the general rule is that it's always the constant that you have towards the end that is basically equal to the equation of the asymptote. So let's look at the asymptotes for exponential graphs. Okay, so now we're going to look at the asymptotes. So let's say you have y is equals to 2 raised to the power of x. Then there will be only a horizontal asymptote, no vertical asymptote. So the equation of the horizontal asymptote is basically y equals to 0. Okay. If, for example, you have y is equals to 2 raised to the power of x plus 3. So in that case, what will be the equation of the horizontal asymptote? The equation of the horizontal asymptote will simply be y is equals to 3. If suppose you have y is equals to minus 3 raised to the power minus x minus 1, then what will be the equation of the horizontal asymptote? The equation of the horizontal asymptote will simply be y is equals to minus 1. Simple as that. Okay? So let's make a general rule. What's the general rule? The general rule is कि आपके पास जैसा भी exponential curve हो, so whether it's y is equals to a raised to the power bx plus c, the equation of the horizontal asymptote will be y is equals to c. Always, no exception. Okay? Now, let's do some examples. Now, you won't find a lot of questions of this chapter because, as I mentioned, this is something that has been added recently only. So there are not a lot of questions. Like, for example, this is a question from October, November 2024. Here, we're supposed to sketch the graph and then we're supposed to write down. When no c, that means it's equal to 0. So here, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to sketch the graph, and not only sketch, we're also supposed to write down the equation of the asymptote. So notice that if you plug in 0 in place of x, you get 1, and everything else remains the same. Achha, this graph has no vertical asymptote. Iman, that's a good question. This graph has no vertical asymptote. Because vertically ये graph जाता रहेगा आगे, this has no vertical asymptote. Achha, I'll share the practice papers inshallah on my Instagram. I'll share them. I'm just putting them in a folder and I'll share them right after this stream. Okay, so मैं अपनी Insta story पे डाल दूंगा. You guys can download it from there. So this is what the graph of 3 power x looks like. Now, who can tell me the equation of the asymptote of this graph? What will be the equation of the asymptote of this graph? It's a 1 mark question, piece of cake. कौन बता सकता है? It's obviously going to be y equals to something. Y equals to what? Y equals to 0. That's it. Y equals to 0 is the answer. Achha, there are some more questions which I would like us to practice. Yep, y equals to 0, that's the correct answer. Okay, here. अब ये एक सवाल था. So this is the graph. Now, although this part is irrelevant, at least it's not relevant right now. Notice here the question says, choose the correct word from the box to complete the statement. The line x equals to 0 is tangent, asymptote, root, perpendicular. Okay, so look at the graph and tell me what will you say about the line x equals to 0. First, visualize the line x equals to 0. It's going to be a vertical line. It's basically going to be the y-axis. So what do you say? The line x equals to 0, is it tangent? Is it perpendicular? Is it a root? Is it asymptote? What do you think is it? It's an asymptote. That's it. Why? Because the line x equals to 0 is the line that the graph is going to is getting closer and closer to, but it's never going to touch it or let alone cut it. So that means the answer to this is asymptote. Okay. इसी तरह के आपके questions हैं. Nothing complicated. Very simple questions. And let's do some more questions. एक ये सवाल करते हैं. Although a bit old, but still relevant. And so in fact, before we do this question, let's do another one in which we're supposed to identify the graphs. Yeah, let's do this one first. Okay. So this says the graph, which of the figures above could be the graph of so-and-so? So we have y can't it be the root? It can't be the root because root क्या होता है? Root तो solution होती है. So क्या ये graph x equals to 0 को cut कर रहा है? No, it's cutting y equals to 0, but not x equals to 0. So that's why it can't be the root. Root means the x-intercept. So the x-intercept is not 0. The x-intercept is some other value. So y equals to x squared plus 2. Now we saw earlier that the graph of y is equals to x squared looks like this. Y is equals to x squared. The graph of y equals to x squared looks like this. Okay, now what happens if I add something to it? What happens if I take the graph of y equals to x squared and I add 2 to it? That means now it's going to move 2 units up. So which graph do you think can be the graph of y equals to x squared? The answer is x equals to figure 3. Very good. Now, tell me the answer to part B. Sir, rational and exponential graphs have any features like perpendicular or parallel? No. रैशनल और एक्सपोनेंशियल में सिर्फ एसिम्प्टोट्स होते हैं जिसका आपको पता होना चाहिए. ठीक है. Okay, part B seems like we have a debate between 2 and 4. Achha, who will decide whether it's 2 or 4? Let's have a look. So it says y is equals to x minus 2 into x plus 1. Now for a minute, if let's say we find out the x-intercepts of this graph, it's going to be x equals to 2 or it's going to be x equals to minus 1. Let's use a comma instead of the word or. Okay, so x equals to 2, comma, x equals to minus 1. These are your x-intercepts. Achha, does it make more sense that I say that figure 2 has x-intercepts 2 and minus 1, or does it make more sense if I say figure 4 has x-intercepts 2 and minus 1? Okay, just use your common sense. No formula, no nothing, just common sense. Which makes more sense? This graph is more towards the right, so that means its x-intercept will be greater compared to its y-intercept. This graph is more towards the left, so that means this doesn't make sense. I mean, how can you have this much distance for minus 1 and only this distance for 2? So that's why it doesn't make sense. Okay, I think the examiner was just playing games. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people would have said figure 4. So the correct answer is actually figure 2. Now what about part C? What about part C? Y is equals to 2 minus x squared. Iska kya jawab hoga? What do you think? Visually 2 appears to have a greater number. Yeah, that's how you figure it out, Maniam. Yeah, the answer is 1. Simple as that. There's only one graph which is a sad face. Remember, we did this in the last class. I think it was Thursday. So if it's minus x squared, that means it's going to be a sad face. There's only one graph which has a sad face, and that's figure 1. Okay? Now, there's one more question which I would like us to solve, and that's it. Because this is something new. It came in the practice paper. And here it is. When are you doing specimen paper? Specimen paper online. Chalo kar lenge. Kisi ek aad din specimen paper bhi online kar lenge. The population of a village is 6,800. The population of the village increases exponentially at a rate of R% per year. At the end of 5 years, the population of the village is 8,353. Find the value of R. Okay. So this is exponential increase decrease. This is something that I have covered also on my channel. Iska ek hi formula hai, and the formula is that total is equal to initial, or you can say the starting value, into 100 plus R upon 100 raised to the power of n. Okay. Now, अगर आपने थोड़ा सा अलग फार्मूला किया है, अगर आपने ये वाला फार्मूला किया है 1 plus r upon 100, तो प्लीज़ इसमें पैनिक ना हो जाएगा. It's the same thing. थोड़ा common sense use कर लें. If you take the LCM of this, you get the same thing. Okay, I just prefer to write it like this compared to this. ठीक है, ये नहीं कि oh my god मेरे टीचर ने तो ये कराया था, ये कोई नया फार्मूला आ गया. नहीं, नया फार्मूला नहीं आया, बस थोड़ा सा common sense use किया. Now, the question says the population of a village is 6,800, so that means this is the initial value. 6,800 is the initial value. Now we're supposed to find out the value of R, so 100 plus R upon 100. How many years are we talking about? We're talking about 5 years, so that means we raise it to the power of 5. Acha, abhi check kar lete hain if the answer is 4.18 or not, so just stay calm. 8353. Okay. So first of all, we will do 100 plus R upon 100 raised to the power of 5, which is equal to 8,353. This is a non-calculator question, by the way, over 6,800. Okay? Achha, I'm just joking. This is not a non-calculator question. Abhi sab pareshan ho gaye honge, I'm sure. You can use your calculator here. Okay, I'll show you guys how to use your calculator. I mean, I know that you guys know how to use it already, but it's best that you do it step by step. Now, next thing that you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take the fifth root. So if you have x squared and you want the value of x, you take the square root on both sides, right? So here you're supposed to take the fifth root on both sides, okay? So you make a fraction and then बल्कि उससे भी पहले write shift and use this key. अच्छा. So this key basically allows you to enter the root of your choice. Okay, so what's the root? The root is the fifth root. What do you want to take the fifth root of? You want to take the fifth root of 8353 over 6800. Okay, so that means 100. Achha, here the 5 and the 5 cancel. So 100 plus r upon 100 is equals to 1.04. Make sure that you show your working as well, okay? So 3 marks आपको बस ऐसी examination hall आने के नहीं मिलेंगे. So you'll multiply this value by 100. Make sure that you are doing this in your calculator. You're not using any rounded off value. So you multiply it by 100, and then what happens when you take this across, you will have to subtract 100. Now when you've gotten to the final value, which is so and so, you can then round it off, and please don't write it as 4.19. I saw someone say 4.18. That's going to be wrong. You will lose, for sure you'll lose 1 mark. मैं होता तो मैं शायद 2 marks cut करता because of such a silly error. But the correct answer will be not 4.19. The correct answer will be 4.20. Okay. Can we solve vectors on calculator? You can, but the kind of vectors that we have in math, वो आप नहीं solve कर सकते हैं. ठीक है, बहुत basic वाले vectors हैं जो हम solve कर सकते हैं. Simple addition, subtraction, which is not really a game changer. Okay, now we're supposed to make the graph. Now remember, this is an exponential increase, so that means we're going to make an exponential graph. We're given the population at the start, which is 6,800. That means this is when t is equals to 0. Now what we do is we just make a shape which looks like an exponential curve, and that's it. ठीक है, ये नहीं कि अब आप values plug in करने बैठ जाएं और आप इसको measure करके बनाएं. This is a sketch. That means they just want to see what does the increase in population look like. So just make sure it looks like an exponential curve, and that's it. So what if we write 4.1997? देखो बेटा, पेपर में एक instruction लिखी होती है that give your answer correct to 3 significant figures. Okay? So, and you read the examiner report. The examiner report mentions this time and again that we expect students to give the answer correct to 3 significant figures. Now, having said that, yes, the examiner, I've noticed, is lenient. So I wouldn't suggest you count on the examiner's leniency. I suggest you just follow the instructions and let that be the end of it. How do I know the y-intercept is 6,800? Okay. So if you notice that at the beginning, the initial value is 6,800. Okay, so at the beginning it's 6,800. Therefore, the y-intercept is 6,800. Except but not urge job to write. तो बेटा आप नहीं लिखेंगी तो कौन लिखेगा? मैं लिखूँगा. वो instructions किसके लिए होती हैं बेटा? कोई भी पेपर का आप पेज खोल लें तो वो instructions किसके लिए होती हैं? उसमें लिखा होता है कि attempt all questions. वो किसके लिए लिखा होता है? वो आपके I mean, I don't know what to say, but वो किसके लिए लिखा होता है? Use your common sense. Open any paper. So let's open a recent paper. Specimen paper खोल लेते हैं. तो मुझे बताओ, answer all questions. ये किसके लिए लिखा हुआ है? Use a black or a dark blue pen. ये किसके लिए लिखा हुआ है? Write your name, center, candidate number in. So आप कह रही हैं कि ये सब तो मेरे लिए है लेकिन ये मेरे लिए नहीं है. तो बेटा ये किसने आपके कान में आके फूका कि ये आपके लिए नहीं है? ये सब आपके लिए लिखा हुआ है. ठीक है. You must show all necessary working. ये आपके लिए नहीं है तो ये क्या चेकर के लिए लिखा हुआ है? जो पेपर आपका चेक कर रहा है उसके लिए लिखा हुआ है. So सारी चीज़ें आपके लिए लिखी हुई हैं बेटा. Now, I'm not just angry, I just think that's a silly question to ask. So I thought I'll answer it in a way so that you don't forget. Okay? Anyway, so Achha, that's about it. I don't think there's anything else to cover as far as asymptotes are concerned. And inshallah, I will be streaming in the coming week. Achha, chalo, wait a minute. Before you guys go anywhere, let's do one more question. I hope nobody's left. Let's do one more question and then that'll be it. So I want you guys to solve this entire question. Ab bas ye kar lein. Just do part C. That's it. Stream on construction. Acha, Emil, I've already uploaded a video on construction, so there is no need for a stream. Okay, I've already uploaded a detailed video on constructions. I've uploaded a video on how to make a perpendicular bisector. I've uploaded a video on how to find out the center of rotation. So only if the question says to write in X numbers. Yeah. If the question has a specific requirement, you follow that requirement. But if the question has, no, you don't need to do the graph. I'm just asking you to do part C. Just do part C. But if the question has no specific requirement, then you write all your answer correct to 3 significant figures. It's a standard rule. It's written, I don't have to tell you this. It's written on the question paper. So this is not even a question to ask because it's written on the question paper. So that's it. Complete the following statement. There are no solutions to the equation 2 into 0.5x. अच्छा एक काम करो. I think ये वाला part करने के लिए आपको graph बनाना पड़ेगा. ठीक है? So skip this part. Okay. Just tell me the answer to this part. The equation of the asymptote of the graph y is equals to 2 into 0.5x minus 1 is going to be what? It's going to be y equals to minus 1. That's correct. Okay, it's going to be y equals to minus 1. If you're doing a paper and we do an entire question wrong, we cut it out and there's no... Yeah, you can take an extra sheet. Paper पे ये भी लिखा होता है कि write just a minute. Okay, it doesn't say on the question paper, but if you take an extra sheet, make sure that you mention it and make sure that you write your name and all your details and that's it. Yeah, so the answer to this final part is simply y is equals to minus 1. Okay? Why? Because when you draw this graph, चलो एक काम करते हैं. Let's not draw this graph, but at least let's see what the graph looks like. Okay, so let's draw this graph here. So this graph will be 2 into 0.5 raised to the power of x minus 1. Okay, so this is what the graph looks like. And you can see the asymptote is basically y equals to minus 1. Okay? So the equation of the asymptote is y is equals to minus 1. Yeah, this is for batch 2025, of course. Sir, k part how? The highest value of k? Uske liye you're supposed to draw the graph. So we skipped that. I just want you to be able to find out the equation of the asymptote, for which we're using a simple rule, which is y equals to the constant that you have. That's going to be the equation of the asymptote. Simple as that. Okay? So there are empty sheets at the... Yeah, if, let's say, there is an empty sheet at the end, do it on that piece of paper. If not, however, like for example, if you can do this, or you can do it on this blank page. That's perfectly all right. But if not, you can always ask for an extra sheet, but just make sure you write down all the details. Okay? Anyway. Achha, how will I do the k part? Achha. So, एक काम करते हैं. इसको देख लेते हैं. देखो, so the question says there are no solutions to the equation 2 into 0.5x minus 1 is equals to k. Ab, for a minute, Remember that this is equal to y and y is equals to k. Now there will be, I just realized that you don't really have to draw the graph. You could have done it otherwise also, but when you have the shape of the graph in front of you, it helps. Now no solution means that y equals to k is going to be a horizontal line. Now where is it that I can draw a horizontal line and it does not intersect the graph? So if I draw a horizontal line at 2, it will intersect the graph. If I draw a horizontal line at 1, that means if k is equals to 1, it's going to be y equals to 1, it's going to intersect the graph. If k is equals to 0, so that means the line we will draw is y is equals to 0, it will intersect the graph. But if k is minus 1, so if I draw a line at minus 1, what happens then? Minus 1 पे अगर कोई line बनाते हैं हम, so y equals to minus 1 is not going to intersect with the graph. So that means the highest possible value of k is minus 1. Not y is equals to minus 1, but simply minus 1. Okay, why? Because below minus 1 also, if you draw a horizontal line, there will be no solution because there is no point of intersection. However, minus 1 is the highest value. The question at this point cannot ask you for the lowest value. That's not possible. But the highest value, which will not give you a solution, is when k is equals to minus 1. Okay. Assalamualaikum, sir. I have a question regarding shading the Venn diagram. Do you shade it normal? Do we draw lines? Just draw lines. I mean, अगर आपका shading का कोई question आता है, maybe, अच्छा इसमें नहीं है. But if you have a shading question here, for example, so just draw lines like these. ठीक है, ये नहीं कि अब आप पूरा अपना आर्ट पैड लेके आप shade करें और फिर आप उसको, I don't know what else you do, but just draw simple lines. That's it. Okay. So I'll stop here. I'll see you guys inshallah in the next stream. No, there will be no part 3 of this. That's it. That's the end of this. However, if there is a stream needed for graphs of functions, I'll see agar us pe main stream kar lunga close to exams. So 4 p.m. inshallah we're starting add maths. 4 p.m. we are starting add maths, and I will be doing differentiation of exponential, trigonometric and logarithmic functions. ठीक हो गया? So I'll stop here. Take care, fellas. Sir, please reply. Reply to what? Sir, if I gave done P1 whole syllabus, can I do P2 syllabus as there isn't much? But please don't ask me these silly questions. I don't have the answer to this. I hope you can, but मुझे नहीं पता where you stand. I don't know what your level of preparation is. मैं आपके साथ नहीं रहता, so I really don't know. But practically speaking, it's not possible. Okay. Acha, what's your question, Saad? So I'll take some questions for a few minutes, and then I'll stop. Acha, we have 2 Saads, 3 Saads, including me. Sir, if there is a triangle represented by a solid line and it asks for inside. Yeah, if there is a triangle represented by a solid line and if it asks for inside, then you will not use the equal to sign. Okay, inside means that boundary is not included, or ऐसा अक्सर bold letters में लिखा होगा. The word inside must be written in bold letters. So in that case, you will not use equal to sign. It's either going to be greater than or lesser than, not that. Isn't graphs of functions same as this? It's same as this, but graphs of functions मैं बात कर रहा हूँ paper 2 वाली. Paper 2, paper 4 वाली, where you have to make the graph, you have to draw a tangent and stuff like that. Can we do logs in maths finding power questions? I don't recommend it. I recommend that you do trial and error. Is it adequate to solve 5 years of paper? If you have been getting a good score consistently, then 5 years are enough. Marcel invests 2,500 at 1.6 simple interest for 3 years. Okay. Compound interest for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, both receive the same amount. Symmetry stream. Symmetry stream मैं बाद में कर लूँगा. Yeah, so what is the question here? Simple interest. तो पहले उसका, okay, so here's what you can do. पहले आप उसका simple interest निकाल लें. 2,500 into 1.6 into 3 divide by 100. उसका simple interest है 120. Now उसने जो amount invest किया 2,000, उसमें 120 add करके इसको solve कर लो. 2120 is equals to 2000 into 100 plus x. I'll tell you how to do it. You can do it yourself. So 2120 is equals to 2000 into 100 plus x upon 100 raised to the power of 3. And if you're wondering, कि 120 कहाँ से है, 120 ऐसे है, 2500 into 1.6 into 3 upon 100. ठीक है, this is 120. और क्योंकि the question says that both of them received the same amount, so you add it to 2000. So add maths complete हो जाएगा before exam. But I hope you're not entirely relying on me. My aim is to cover all the important topics such as functions, differentiation, integration, trigonometry. Baki to already is on my channel. Binomial, circular measure, all that stuff is already on my channel. So tips for time management, if I can remember all topics well while doing yearly, please. Even then, देखो कुछ questions ऐसे होते हैं जो सिर्फ पढ़ो और solve हो सकते हैं. As in you don't need to think a lot. Like for example, in trigonometry, sometimes you have to think a lot. You have to think which triangle to draw. You have to think from where to draw the line and stuff like that. In mensuration also, sometimes you have to think, okay, maybe where should I take the open, should I take the outer surface, inside surface, what faces should I consider, how many objects do I consider? So these are questions where you have to think a lot. But oftentimes there are topics, there are questions which don't require a lot of thinking. Like for example, अब जैसे ये है, इसमें आपने क्या करना है, सिंपल इक्वेशन बनानी है, सॉल्व करना है, दैट्स इट. ठीक है, इसमें सोचना पड़ेगा, लीव इट फॉर लेटर. हियर it's a very simple question. If you memorize if you have the shapes memorized, just draw the graphs and move on. Transformation, you have to think a lot. Okay, then you have a question like this, no thinking needed, just divide everything by 3 and solve. So there are questions that require little to no formula and almost no thinking whatsoever. Like for example here, this can be a bit of trial and error, but there's no formula that you need. You just need to know what a prime number is, what a rational, irrational number is. So solve questions like these. Always start with questions which require little to no thinking at all and no formula is needed. As for example, ye paper 2 ka question is. That means what's being tested is how well you can use your calculator. Here, 40% of 530. It's not like you have to recall a formula to understand how to do this. Questions like these require no thinking at all. Even अगर आपका दिमाग बंद भी है, आप किसी जिसको सिर्फ कैलकुलेटर चलाना आता है आप उसको दे दें, वो भी सॉल्व कर देगा. ये अगर आप किसी को कैलकुलेटर चलाना आता है उसको दे दें, वो भी सॉल्व कर देगा. ठीक है. अच्छा, लूप वाला मेथड, आई नो सर जैन का एक लूप वाला मेथड है. आई एम नॉट वेल अवेयर ऑफ इट, बट व्हाट आई सजेस्ट इज start with what you know, start with questions that you can solve easily. I think Sir Zain ka jo loop wala method hai, usme he has divided questions into different categories. I haven't seen it yet, but try it out. Try his method. If it works, then great. Stick to it. No need to experiment, especially this close to exams. So, और देखो जो भी method आप follow करो, it's always best to start with what you know. Why? Because you have to watch out for two things. You don't just have to watch out for marks, you also have to watch out for your confidence level. So when you start with what you know, you feel more confident. And with that state of mind, you approach the difficult questions. And when you approach a difficult question, feeling confident, feeling pumped up, your chances of getting that question right will definitely increase exponentially. I mean, that means he basically gave name to count. Yeah, so do all topics require no English, no things? So वही बात हो गई ना. Do all questions that require no thinking, no formula, no nothing, just read the question and you can solve. Oftentimes there are questions where it's just LCM and cross multiply and stuff like that. Like for example, this is a specimen paper. अब जैसे ये क्वेश्चन है, इसका एक सिंपल सा तरीका है इसको सॉल्व करने का. Yes, there is a formula, but it's just one formula. Use that formula to solve. So start with questions like these. Sometimes there are algebraic expressions like functions. Functions में भी कोई ज़्यादा सोचने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. Just plug in 3, that's it, get the answer. चलें, while we're at it, इसका भी जवाब देते हैं आप लोग. Write down the equation of the asymptote to the graph y is equals to 3. चलो इसको भी मैं ऐड कर देता हूँ. इसको कॉपी करके यहाँ पे ऐड कर देते हैं. इनफैक्ट पूरे क्वेश्चन को ही सॉल्व कर लें आप लोग. Y equals to 5, that's it. So y is equals to 5 is the equation of the asymptote. Good job. Now find out the coordinates of A. Is the point where the curve cuts the x-axis. That means y is the y-axis. That means x is going to be 0. And how will you find out? How will you find out the y coordinates? So simply plug in 0 in place of x. 3 into 2 power 0 plus 5. 2 power 0 is 1. So 3 plus 5, that's equal to 8. Easy. 3 easy marks. I've done cubic graphs in the last stream, Saad. I've done cubic graphs in the last stream. Now, why would it be 3? It's always the constant that you're adding towards the end. That's the answer. So what's the constant that you're adding towards the end? It's 5. Y equals to 5 is the answer. Why would it be 3? Beta 3 to multiply ho raha hai. Okay, refer to your notes. It's always the constant that is being added towards the end. Chalo main isko aur elaborate karke likh deta hu. Y equals to the constant that is added. अच्छा, added भी हो सकता है, subtracted भी हो सकता है. Okay, so I'll upload these notes also. Make sure to download them, and I'll also upload the PDF. Okay, so that's it, fellas. Now, this time it's it for real. I'll see you guys, inshallah, in the next stream. So take care, everyone. Allah Hafiz.